That's all right. I'm going to talk specifically about community wind farms rather than other general climate change things. And I'll try to share it with John McSween, who can talk about the kinds of projects we've been supporting. I'll talk about how the community wind farm model works. This will be familiar to most of the people here, unfortunately, but hopefully of some use to maybe Gemma, possibly, if you think of doing some community wind farm projects over in Kinloch. But anyway, the basic structure of a community wind farm model is twofold. One is you have a community-owned holding company, usually a charity, and that's what Point and Sandwick Trust is. And then that charity, that holding company, then sets up a trading subsidiary, which it wholly owns, in this case, Point and Sandwick Power, and it's that trading subsidiary that goes out and builds and operates the wind farm. So in our case, Point and Sandwick Power raised all the finance for the wind farm, and you do it like any normal wind farm developer. You get some lending or some equity involved. For community wind farms, it's usually 100% lending, unless you can get some grant from somewhere. And although with the new Scottish Infrastructure Bank, I think it's called, they might be willing to put in some equity as well. So that might be a way forward in the future. And so once you've got a project that you've got consented, then your project is bankable, as I say, and you can get that kind of lending from banks to cover the capital costs of a project. You sign up with long-term contracts with people in the private sector who can provide, first of all, the turbines, then the installation, and then the operation and the maintenance of the turbines. You'll also probably need somebody else to sign up to handle the sales from your wind farm. So for any community wanting to do a community wind farm, they don't need to think that they have to become experts in any of these aspects, far less in all of these aspects. What they have to do is to have trustworthy partners they can contract with to be able to deliver their project. And when it's up and running, it produces profit like any normal wind farm, and all that profit is gift-aided by the trading company upstairs, if you like, to the holding charity. In this case, it goes from PS Power up to Point and Sandwick Trust. So that's a basic model. This is our particular project. As Kathleen said, it's still the biggest in the UK. Unfortunately, I would like it to be overtaken by bigger community projects, but it hasn't happened since we got built back in 2015, 2016. It's 3 turbines, 9 megawatts installed. That was the biggest available at the time, 3 megawatt turbines onshore, but of course there are now bigger turbines being talked of being placed onshore as well. They've been pioneered offshore, and people are now moving these big giant turbines onshore. The Beinn Ghrideag output, those 3 turbines, is enough to supply electricity for all the households on Lewis and Harris. So just 3 turbines can deliver that, which is quite remarkable, really. The cost of these turbines was 14 million. Debt finance, as I said, borrowed from Santander Bank. The gross turnover of sales is 2.5 to 3 million a year. That's a usual year. Last year, of course, we haven't had hardly any income because the cable has been cut off to the mainland. The average annual net income from that 2.5 to 3 million after you pay the operational costs, the maintenance costs, and the financing costs, repaying all the debt, for us has been 600,000 a year. So that will increase over time. As you pay down the debt, then the amount of income that you can get as profit increases, and eventually you pay off all the debt, and all the net income is profit. And all of that is gift aided to the holding charity. A quick comparison with a conventional wind farm, which is done by a private developer or a corporate developer. If you look at the left-hand column there, it shows a typical, not even a typical corporate wind farm community benefit fund payment. It's actually at the highest end. £5,000 per megawatt is what's recommended by the Scottish Government now, and it is getting paid now by new developers. But 5 years ago, £2,500, £3,000 was more typical. But anyway, take £5,000 per megawatt. It means for our turbines that would equate to 15,000 per turbine, or 45,000 a year for the 3 turbines in a community benefit payment, if our 3 turbines were owned by a private developer. Because it's community owned, we're in the position we see on the right hand column there, which is that we are averaging about 66,000 per megawatt. As I say, that will increase over time. I think the typical wind farm income over time is about £100,000 per megawatt, at least up to now. Future sort of economics of wind farms might differ, because the whole energy market is changing in various ways that nobody can predict. But anyways, for us so far it's been 66,000. That equates to 200,000 per turbine, just under, and about 600,000 a year for the wind farm. If you take it over the 25 years, after refinancing and after you've finished paying off all the costs, then you can expect up to 20 million from our wind farm going back into the community in community funds, as opposed to 1 million if it had been in private or corporate hands. That's our figures. Other community wind farms are doing even better, actually, because they've got FIT payments, which are more lucrative, or else they've got 100% ROC subsidy, whereas we've only got 90%. So Aquaterra did a report earlier this year, and it showed that on average, community-owned wind farms paid communities 34 times more than private or corporate wind farms. That's the local economic impact from these wind farms, because sadly, the economic impact from directly created jobs is usually pretty small. I think there's just 4 people locally employed to do all the turbines from in the Western Isles, and that's quite a lot of turbines spread over a large area. So the number of jobs, even on a very, very big wind farm, it'll be probably still in single figures. So unless you capture that profit flow, then sadly, the local economic wind farm from wind farms is quite small. I'm going to stick in 2 slides here, just to be a wee bit provocative. One is to look at, everybody's sort of saying, I hear Boris Johnson and various other people, Scottish politicians, saying we want to be the Saudi Arabia of renewables. I would rather we were the Denmark of renewables. So if you look at Denmark, they've got now, as you can see the bottom line there, 40% of the onshore turbines are community-owned, cooperative-owned, municipal-owned. And that equates to 1.8 gigawatts of community wind in Denmark. So all that money in Denmark is going back into those communities. It's not going, elsewhere. Scotland, we've got more installed wind farms onshore. We've got 8 gigawatts, which is more than Denmark, but we've just got 1%. of capacity onshore, which is community owned. And so I show these figures just to say, you know, it can be done. It's been done elsewhere where you build at scale with community ownership, but in the UK, it just hasn't happened yet. Then I'm going to switch to DJ. DJ, do you want to sort of talk to these slides? I'll move the slides if you talk to them. Describe how the trust is set up.
Yeah, that's fine, Calum. Thanks. We've got 20 villages all in the Point and Sandwick area, covering the district to the east of Stornoway, including Straneish, Sandwick, Plasterfield, and all points east to Jumping Head. There's about 3,000 electors in the area, plus one fairly large primary school. Currently, we have 500 members of the trust. Anybody who's an elector in the area is entitled to become a member. Membership is free, and we encourage people to become members if they can. The Point and Sandwick Trust Board is elected annually by members at an AGM, with a quarter of the directors standing down every year. We did that deliberately so that there would be continuity between directors. It's quite a complex business, not just running the wind farm, as Calum has explained, but it's also quite complex sifting through the grant applications, scoring them, and then distributing the gift aid. Point and Sandwick Trust Board appoints directors from its membership onto the power company as well. And so far, we've been very, very successful in that we have retained quite a lot of our original board members from way back in 2005. They're all still very enthusiastic. We're about half and half male, female, so we're gender balanced just about, and we have quite a vast range of skills on our board as well, and that's quite deliberate because, you know, we don't want anybody just coasting along and being a member of the board just for fun. We want all board members to be actively involved and participating at all levels. And as I said, we're very, very fortunate indeed that we've managed to keep that impetus and ambition going in the community. Sometimes it was quite difficult because, you know, 10 years in the baking is a long, long time. And there were many, many obstacles in our way as well, which kept the development quite exciting and kept the board members very engaged. The tipping point for us came, I suppose, when we got planning permission in 2009, and then we had a project that on paper was worth quite a lot, and in fact we got an offer of one of the major power companies at that point, which we rejected, thank goodness. But once we got the wind farm built and operating in 2016, we were in a position to start distributing the gift aid. And Calum, if you flag up the next slide, there are some pretty remarkable headline figures there from what we've done in really what amounts to a short period of time. Over £20 million worth of gift aid reinvested in a wide range of community projects. And also there's been a huge amount of additional external funding being levered in as well, making a total community reinvestment of around the 5 million mark. One of the things we decided early on was that we would not become a major employer and have a vast workforce and big offices and all the rest of it. We operate really with 3 basic staff, myself, Calum, and an office manager. But importantly, we have 2 community consultants, Alistair Nicholson, who's with us tonight, and Tony Robson, who started work with us in 2007. 2017, sorry. And their function is to engage with all those various community organisations in the Point and Sandwick area who want to develop their own ideas and bring them forward, helping them from having the basic idea to setting up their organisations and then attracting and levering funding in. And Alistair has levered in a phenomenal amount of funding in the last 4 years, which has helped our local economy and helped these groups achieve some of their ambitions as well. Last year we had an independent social impact assessment done by Impact Hub of Inverness to see just what impact we were having in our community and what our community felt about how we were going about things and how we were reinvesting the gift aid back into the community. And one of their findings was that we had created or sustained 32 full-time posts and 25 part-time posts, plus supporting new and existing local businesses. Now that's a huge impact, and these are independent figures which we are very, very proud of. So we are having an impact. Community-owned wind farms are, the way to go, absolutely, as Calum has outlined. The Aquaterra report determined that, and lagging far behind Denmark and Scotland is not a good position to be. We would be in a far better position if Scottish Government and local authorities realised the importance of community wind farms in addressing long-standing economic woes, especially in rural areas. And in our area, we all know what they are: depopulation, lack of inward investment or any kind of investment, young people legging it as fast as they can to the mainland because of lack of opportunity and an aging population. It's the answer to that is staring us in the face, and that is social enterprise and community wind farms and community renewable development. Some of the projects that we've helped in the last few years have been quite varied. One of the key ones is Bethesda Hospice, which we support to the tune of 55,000 annually. That's a huge investment, and that'll continue for as long as our turbines are turning. And we made that commitment right at the beginning, and Bethesda Hospice are very, very grateful to us for that, because it allows them to start every financial year with 55k in the bag, and then they go out and attract match funding for that, up to $250,000 every year. One of our other flagship projects is the Crofter Woodland scheme, which covers all of the Western Isles, not just Point and Sandwick. And to date, we have planted 150,000 native trees everywhere from Ness to Barra. And that is absolutely wonderful as well, because not only are we addressing carbon reduction, but we're also improving the environment as well. Trees are very, very important for ecosystems, and in an area like the Western Isles, they make people feel better, they make animals feel better, and encourage quite a lot of biodiversity. We also help people with special needs and young people in the Foyer project, people with drug and alcohol issues. We help the local schools as well annually, and we support our local elderly groups as well. We're also involved with Tony and Alistair in quite ambitious projects. One is a coastal path all around Point and Sandwick, and that's been coming along really, really well. The restoration of an old mill locally here, a medieval chapel, which we are helping as well. So, our gift aid is not just frittered away in revenue terms, it's also being used in capital terms to leave a lasting legacy. And we're very, very fortunate that we were able to get our turbines built at the time that we did, because the development climate has changed quite considerably, as Calum said. Fits and rocks have been slashed, and the emphasis now is on corporate development, which will not really help the Western Isles one iota. I've got nothing else to add. Quite happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I can just briefly mention that one of the areas we're investing in is actually trying to get new community energy projects going. We're working on a grid supporting battery project at the moment. We hope we'll be able to deliver that next year. Fingers crossed. There's lots of bridges still to get over before that happens. And we have also been working on a hydrogen ferry project, that is making community hydrogen in the islands to service all the local ferry network, joining the islands and also joining us to the mainland. So these are two big areas in particular that we're investing in as well. So, and if anybody wants to ask a question about that, I can talk more about it. So that's us finished, I think.
Okay, thanks both, and thank you to DJ for coming in and speaking as well. I should have introduced you at the start if I'd known, but it's good to hear more from you two, so thank you for that. Like Calum was saying, does anyone have any questions for either Calum or Don John?
I've got a fairly general question, but just in terms of everything that the Trust has been able to achieve, and obviously you're still really active in so many projects now, and it's quite a big question, but I don't know, what factors do you think have led to that success? What have been the kind of real key things to getting where you are now?
I'd say, Matthew, dogged determination, going round any obstacle that was placed in our way, not taking no for an answer, and critically also in the early days, Community Energy Scotland were there to provide finance to get environmental studies done and to help shunt the project forward. We were also extremely fortunate in having Calum Macdonald on board as a local, because his knowledge of the industry and his contacts proved to be absolutely invaluable to us. I think any community that has ambition and determination can really go the way we went. Calum was able to assemble a really skilled team as well of industry experts and finance people to help us on our way. And, you know, these people exist in almost every community in the Highlands and Islands. Unfortunately, they all leg it away as fast as they can because there are no job opportunities here for us. And but if we retain contact with these guys and tap into their knowledge and their expertise, it can be done. You know, even by small communities, it can be done. And you know, borrowing 14 million for a small community like yours was really, I mean, that was the height of ambition. But if you have a solid project, if you have a solid watertight business plan, then any bank will take you seriously. And it's all to do with finance and whether your project is credible or not. I think these are the key things.
Yeah, I would agree with DJ. Ambition, determination, persistence. I mean, it took 10 years to go from the first meeting to financial close. but that's not unusual for the wind farm industry, really. So, but for communities, have got to be prepared for that kind of long haul if necessary. But it's worth it in the end, because you've got something that's going to deliver for another 25 years, and there's no equivalent source of income to communities than, you know, wind farms and the other projects. We're working, as DJ said, we wouldn't take no for an answer. We heard no from our landlord. We didn't accept that. We heard no from SSE. We didn't accept that. And if necessary, we went down and saw, you know, Ofgem and National Grid and those people to try to get over these obstacles. We're having the same thing with the battery project. You know, SSE are tendering for it at the moment, but they're saying, oh, well, you can have a battery, but you can only use it on Lewis. You can't export any battery services to the mainland, when it's technically entirely feasible to do that using an A&M system. And by limiting it to Lewis, of course, that means that it just will not be viable. So yet again, we've got to take that argument over the heads of SSE, go to the National Grid, and if they don't say yes, we've got to go to Ofgem. If they don't say yes, we've got to go to government. And that's just what you've got to do in order to, you know, to get to where you want to be. And Ewan will have the same stories. I mean, there were so many obstacles that came in the way of delivering the Barra project. It's phenomenal that they managed to get it up, because, you know, just the location and transport and all that kind of stuff was a real nightmare. But Ewan can tell you about that.
Yeah, no, it's funny because we were speaking about that very thing in the session earlier today. We were saying that, you know, it seems so difficult for groups today, but when you think back to when all the now installed projects were up and running, were developing, there were so many challenges back then as well. So it's kind of, we did cover that, to not to think that it's too difficult, because that would have stopped all the projects that are now installed. So it's interesting that you've been covering that just now. I think Calum has very nicely led on to our next speaker, Ewan from Barra. So I'll hand over to Ewan just to go through what's been happening in Barra now.
No worries, let's just share the screen. Nothing has come up at my end.
It looks like you've gone to the end of the slideshow for us, Ewan. So I don't know.
Let's try another way then. Let's go.
Yeah.
And let's do from current slide.
That's it.
Okay. Well, Calum and DJ, you've made me feel a wee bit like the poor cousin down here. I'm quite glad I've taken a slightly different perspective to the presentation today. I'm going to broaden the envelope a little bit, but initially I want to focus on an interactive element, because this week's about the wider community looking at various themes within the community: environment, transport, energy, growing, crofting, adaptation, and next step. So as you listen to what I'm about to say, try and apply it to these and think within your own community how you might make a real and lasting difference. And a little bit of background first. I would love to sort of pin my environmental credentials to the table. I can in part through the company's mission statement, which is to develop the economic, social and cultural sustainability of the Barra and Vatersay community by harnessing and promoting the quality of its resources, people and environment for the long-term benefit of all members of our present and future community. Let's step aside a little bit, because we drafted that in-house, but it's actually almost tantamount to the definition of sustainable development. And that's a theme that I'm going to try and spin through what I say. But back to reality, I have to confess that the driver behind our renewable energy was largely income generating from a company perspective because we were frustrated. I didn't know that Point and Sandwick was at 2005 or incorporated, so were we. And we found a high proportion of our staff time was spent securing core funding as opposed to delivering projects. So that was the major impetus behind delivering our community wind turbine. And I was reflecting as I was putting together these slides and thinking, yes, we've progressed on from that a little bit, but we're still trapped in what I would term a cyclical project-based model, where like Point and Sandwick, we're trying to lever in additional sums of money for the dividend from the wind turbine. But what we find are there are limited pots of money and repeated rounds of application and match funding, which is still tying up staff resource and frustrating us from actually achieving our objectives. That said, I'll concede that policy shifts have meant that funding's tracking sustainable development goals, which is assisting us in delivering for the local community. The other thing I'd like to add is that I'm pulling back away from renewable energy at the moment, but saying the focus of this week's about climate, but we have to remember that there is more to sustainable development rather than just climate. The abstraction serves a purpose, but we need to sort of focus on a wider system approach. And again, I'm going to try and stream that through what I have to say. There's more to it than just renewable energy. And we also have to start thinking about behaviour and lifestyle and the need to operate within limits. And I've put one other little comment above the picture on the right. And it's an interesting question in that, will a wind turbine be viable at the end of the lifespan of this existing one without fits? And I think that'd be an interesting discussion. I don't know the answer. I'm going to, in terms of local projects, take a dual approach whereby I'm going to cast back to projects we've traditionally undertaken or historically undertaken, and then I'm going to create a reset the baseline and look at the local energy plan, and then look at current and future projects. And it's quite interesting. I put these slides together over the weekend. And if you look back before COP26 and the hype leading up to that, we've been delivering these types of projects since we were incorporated. Going back to the Climate Challenge Fund, we had Fabric First type EPC surveys. We looked at hard to heat homes. We conducted 2 waste audits locally. We even looked at community composting way back in 2009. We conducted 2 district heating feasibility studies, which unfortunately due to network issues, which I'll touch on later, we never got off the ground. We looked at erosion projects, which interestingly seem to have come full circle again, and that there are various contacts within the last week highlighting erosion issues over in Vatersay. It's hard to say whether it's a result of increasing visitor numbers or whether it's increased high waters and high tides, probably a combination of both of them. We also supported other local projects, North Bay Church and North Bay Hall, in terms of wind turbines, smaller ones, Proven, now known as Kingspan, Garrabost, a local horticultural project with a wind turbine project, Vatersay wind turbine, that's over at Vatersay Hall. Lessons to be learnt there. Pick the right technology, tried and tested or otherwise. The turbine failed after the first year, if I recall. Company went bust. They're left without a turbine. And similar to Point and Sandwick, but on a much smaller scale, a 910 kilowatt community wind turbine. And looking back at these, it's quite interesting because when we consider current and future projects, you'll see a shift in the complexity of the renewable energy projects. And I've got this fancy phrase, from single to multi-vector, associated with increasing design and operational complexity. All I mean by that is that current projects have tended to combine technologies so that we've got wind, solar PV, and battery storage all in one project. And also moving forward, want to think about what the barriers and drivers are to upscaling it. And I've got a few slides that I'm going to look at in terms of network design, data, IT, the need for a smart grid, artificial intelligence, and how these can impact on supply and consumption, not just locally, but throughout the Western Isles. And just as evidence of credentials, the photographs top left, these are coastal defence works over in Vatersay to reopen a local slip. It's originally used for herring stations. And further, similarly down, that's more towards the completion of the same project. And again, top right and just underneath it, these were issues to do with erosion that we obtained old nets from the then Marine Harvest, now Maui, and successfully deployed them in terms of reducing sand erosion. Bottom left is a little bit of a cheeky slide. Those that know me will know that I'm interested in seaweed and pushing for a pilot seaweed farm. Back in 1835, this is what the then McNeill Barra undertook as a project with investors in order to harvest kelp and to ship down for the manufacture of glass down in Liverpool. Unfortunately, Gordon of Cluny, one of his investors, removed his investment within the first year and the whole business collapsed. So I suppose one of the messages is we think we've come so far, but some of it's been done before. Moving on to what I was talking about, the local energy plan, which allowed us to consolidate exactly where we were in terms of the projects we previously delivered, and allowed us to put all the challenges together in one report and identify a series of actions locally. Challenges, again, which aren't just typical of Barra, they're typical or characterise the whole of the Western Isles. High levels of fuel poverty, inefficient energy consuming houses, high levels of electric and oil heating, which is quite an interesting statement because it's almost passé now. And if you consider the Scottish Government's heat and building strategy and the deployment of heat pumps. Grid constraint for larger local generation assets, Calum touched upon that. But the fact that we've got a constrained grid is limiting what we can actually deploy on it to address renewable or carbon targets. And it highlighted the significance of transport links. We've got 69% of the population economically active, typically travel to work by car, and the importance of ferry and air travel routes to the mainland, because that 69% of the population economically active actually belies the fact that about 12% are actually employed on the mainland, whether it's in offshore jobs or the like. So these travel links are essential. And a high number of households that have access to at least one car or van. So this is a table summarising the actions that were identified as a result of the local energy plan, classified according to energy in the home, tariff switching, water efficiency. And some of you might say, why water efficiency? Well, in terms of water, it's the second highest energy user on the island in terms of the filtration and pumping it. So, and then you have to consider water use in the house and the fact that you've got water heating, you might have wet central heating in the house, and also adding into the fact that you're actually 30 to 40% of that potable water is being flushed down the toilet. I mentioned previously fabric insulation and space heating improvements, small scale generation, heat pumps in new buildings, and energy efficiency awareness, highlighting the ongoing need for education. Transport, community minibus, extension of EV charging infrastructure, electric vehicle awareness in the car club, and active travel in order to encourage more walking and cycle paths. And on the larger scale energy projects, and there remained an interest in the Western Isles Energy Supply Company. sharing of knowledge, which we're doing tonight, local generation and supply, smart grid development, hydrogen from wind generation, district heating, and again, something that's almost become historical, heating oil purchasing options. So this slide is intended to look at, well, where are we in respect of these aims and objectives arising from the local energy plan? That was back in 2018. In recent months, we've been progressing a proposal with Technip FMC for hydrogen. Early days yet. We've approached various off-takers, Scottish Water, Barra Atlantic Limited, CMAL, and Scottish and Southern, because like Stornoway and like Lewis, when we're islanded, that means when we haven't got a connection to the transmission grid, or during an outage perhaps arising in Lewis, that we rely on a diesel power station, not carbon friendly. So we've been looking at alternatives for that, and when its end of lifespan is approaching. We've also progressed an e-bike project at Castle Bay Marina. This is what I was talking about, combining technologies, so solar PV and battery storage. In terms of the facility block at the marina, we've got the solar PV, we've got water saving fittings, we've got energy and water efficient appliances, and we've got rainwater harvesting. And Scottish Water kindly donated an interpretation panel. The Herring Walk, we've got advanced works which are looking at immediate actions in terms of coastal erosion, and we've got a main proposal which we've got planning permission for, and we're hoping to get funding through the Levelling Up Fund bid to be submitted by the Corla in January, I believe now. We were also successful in supporting voluntary action Barra and Vatersay in a green transport hub, which involves electric vehicle charging points and 2 electric minibuses. Voluntary action involved in the delivering community transport locally. Garrabost, we were involved in providing more electric vehicle charging points combined with storage. At that point with the wind turbine, but subsequently that's been complemented by additional solar PV generation. And seaweed, we are looking at progressing a pilot seaweed farm. And there's lots of different potential markets for seaweed at the moment, and the food market's probably the most lucrative, but we would like to develop into the biorefinery market. If you upscale it to a sufficient level, you could even consider biofuel, which I noticed that CMAL have actually included in an option appraisal for the future of powering ferries. And we also looked at an electric boat during the season for seaweed farms, only about 2 months harvesting, so, and maybe another 2 weeks in terms of deployment. So we're talking about a work boat and using it as a boat taxi out of season. The other area, I'm not going to read all these details, people are welcome to a copy of the slides, but just to highlight the importance of academia and research. In many respects, the local energy plan created a platform, and we've had lots of approaches. We try not to turn anyone away, and we're quite happy to devote staff time to support these, because we take the opinion that we're getting something back that can push forward our agenda and our mission. And it's a sort of hat off to other initiatives, US and Barra Community Energy Forum, US Local Energy Plan, which the Council have helped facilitate on both sides, the Island Deal, Island Centre for Net Zero, Repeat, which Community Energy Scotland and High are involved in, other wider networks, Lesson, which is a local energy systems Scottish industry network, Calum, who was the impetus behind High Hebrides, and the other area that I think would be very important or significant is, and in terms of delivering our objectives, is the passage of the local energy bill through Westminster, something which we should all be campaigning for and watch the space closely. Just moving on a little bit, some of the drivers for change. Calum and I have talked about this in the past, and it's a case of, do we want to be subject to such fluctuations? If you look at the cost for basically heating oil, and the fact that it's subject to, and it's very volatile, and the cost in the Western Isles vis-a-vis that in the mainland it's much, much higher. You look at this, I had to actually insert Barra as being off the scale. So the big question is, if it's carpe diem, if we look at the opportunities afforded by renewable energy and alternative fuel vectors, can we actually change things around so that we're self-sufficient in terms of energy need and we're net energy exporters as opposed to energy importers? And the other question I think is worthwhile highlighting here is that I think we need to take a stock take and say, have previous initiatives resulted in significant shifts in fuel poverty, the cost of energy and fuel, or the fabric or EPC status of buildings? And it's a case of, we've got an opportunity to make a difference here. We need to take that opportunity. Again, this is another challenge whereby if you look at the energy and electricity network, we're frustrated. And Calum mentioned active network management. In Orkney, as far as I can ascertain, the constraint managed zone is a similar thing, but it's a poor relative of what's actually capable with a truly smart grid. We've got ongoing issues of curtailment and constraint, no new distributed energy assets. Off-grid projects that reduce existing network demand are also impacted. Limited renewable penetration, we've only got 33% here in Barra. Uncertainty for Lewis and Harrison in terms of the HVDC link and the need for contingency planning. The need indeed to look at Ofgem's remit beyond cost to include net zero objectives. The need for a significant grid code review. I've mentioned the local electricity bill, but really what we're looking at is a network designed for centralised generation and legacy effects which are still present. And I'm hoping, Repeat and the Island Centre for Net Zero will take forward some of these issues. This is just a slide looking at, again, which another challenge, but it could perhaps be an opportunity. In Orkney, the constrained network was an opportunity because they couldn't actually use all their generation, so they looked at alternatives for using it. And whilst we haven't been constrained, we have been subject to curtailment. And my question is whether, and if you look at the lost income, could we use that for other applications? Calum mentioned batteries. I would say, could we use it perhaps to generate hydrogen in order to kickstart a hybrid energy economy? But to do that, we need a sizable and predictable demand. Again, looking at other challenges or issues with the electricity grid, this is just to highlight there are issues with focusing on the export market. If you look at the gradation in terms of transmission charges, £7.36 in Scotland, £4.70 moving down to the lowlands and down to 49 pence in England. And again, it just requires lobbying. It has to be put on the table and questions raised. And if you consider things like transmission charges in the context of fuel poverty, let's look at the current prices of electricity. And again, there are disparities of £400 in the UK and yet much lower prices throughout Europe. And I don't know why these differences arise, but again, we need to be asking the questions as to why they do arise. And another possible opportunity, where if we were able to look at local energy supply, which is dependent on the passage of the local electricity bill, how many of these proportions of the electricity bill could actually be retained locally and maximising local retention of the value chain? I do know that we sell electricity roughly under a power purchase agreement for about 5 pence per kilowatt hour, and I know the costs will have gone up since, but 15 to 20 pence per kilowatt hour for someone to buy it in. And so we're losing a lot, a margin from the local economy. Okay, enough of the problems. What type of whole system energy network would be ideal? This is trying to flag up all the recent news has been on the Net Zero Centre in Stornoway. However, the report before the Fraser-Nash one highlighted a number of clusters where a cross-sectional approach to deploying hydrogen in the transport and heat sectors appear to exist, with the potential to catalyse new onshore wind development or release existing non-dispatchable wind power in these localities. We've got the Stornoway area, we've got Harris, we've got Loch Boisdale, we've got Barra. And the other point I want to highlight here is we've got an overlap between electricity and hydrogen. And that's why I'm calling it an energy network rather than an electricity network. And the two are not synonymous. And reinforcement of a fragile grid is likely to be prohibitively expensive on the basis of population density. Alternative energy vectors will be needed to deliver net zero aspirations in terms of heat and transport targets. And I'm suggesting here smart grid-tied microgrids may be the way forward, promoting self-sufficiency and local energy economies, encompassing both supply and demand. Some of you may have heard of Reflex in Orkney, certainly a step in the right direction, but we need data and IT and alternative energy vectors to deliver a new energy economy. On the right, it's just looking at what these grids might be in terms of it and clusters throughout the Western Isles, and moving away from this idea that everything can be supplied from the net zero hub in Stornoway, which would be subject to transport and storage challenges. And just before I move on to other sectors in terms of climate challenge or climate change, it's almost deja vu as I was flicking through websites. And recently I heard about the Scottish Government's proposal for a carbon neutral island, and it rang a bell in my mind because this happened through the Big Green Challenge in Egg way back in 2010. We've also got potential lessons to be learnt from off-grid island systems and how they've circumvented challenges which we get told by the network operators are insurmountable. But everything shouldn't be doom and gloom. There are new vistas. The MV Hydra, through the Norwegian operator Norled, they've taken delivery of this vessel, currently operates on battery power, but will run exclusively on liquid hydrogen once the new fuel becomes available at a later stage in the vessel's development. So enough of electricity and renewable energy. This is just a fun chart whereby it's quite interesting to track what the changes have been in the different sectors contributing to carbon since 1990. If you look at the energy supply, there have been decreases, whereas in transport it's remained relatively static, and so too is the situation in agriculture. Okay. And also, as opposed to just physical changes and technological changes, again, I'm going to highlight, and I'll come back to this, the need for behaviour and lifestyle changes and the need to operate within limits. Another slide just to highlight what potential sources and sinks are in terms of carbon. Carbon dioxide, main greenhouse gas emitted or removed in most sectors, with the exception of agriculture and related land use and waste management sectors. Methane, main net gas emitted in agriculture and related land use sectors. Almost all emissions waste sector, methane. Point to note, and I'm going to highlight this in the next couple of slides, forestry, carbon sink. So in terms of, can I go backwards or do I have to? Previous, bear with me.
You should be able to go backwards, yeah.
I've got
there
it.
You go, Ian. One there.
This is coming back to land use, and land use is, it depends on what scale you look at it. Some pie charts are budgets say it's about 15%, others 20%, others up to 30% of carbon emissions are associated with land use. And it got me thinking a few months ago, and there have also been a number of presentations. I believe there's one from Peatland Action this week. But it's to look at peatland and woodland and what we can do with the land resource in the Western Isles, and to ask the question that is the current use the best use? Can it be improved? Should we just leave peat? Should we restore peat? Can we plant trees on peatland? Could we improve carrying capacity of land if we planted shelter belts? Could we open up opportunities through shelter belts for local crops and local food production? So there's a lot of issues kicking around here. And I find it quite interesting when you look at crofting itself and particular areas of common grazing, because if you unpack that term common grazing, that is what the crofters have, and the crofting shareholders have got a right to in relation to common grazing. And yes, there are dispensations that will allow them to put up renewables and also forestry, but it's a case of whether there should be a wider consideration of what crofting shareholders can do with common grazing land and with whom. And one idea I picked up after attending the Land Commission Scotland's recent conference was whether we should be looking at this through the Scottish Land Rights and Responsibility Statement. The vision is a Scotland with a strong and dynamic relationship between its land and people, where all land contributes to a modern and successful country, and where rights and responsibilities in relation to land are fully recognised and fulfilled. And if you look at some of the principles, contribute to public interest and well-being, support sustainable economic development, protect and enhance the environment, and then moving on, communities' well-being and future development, collaboration and community engagement. So it's just something I'm throwing out there as food for thought. And obviously in terms of a potential carbon store and ecosystem services, I couldn't overlook seaweed. And the last bit is, I'm not sure if all of you felt like I did after COP26. Part of me is looking at COP26 and then, why is it 26? Because there have been 25 previous ones, and all the 25 previous ones have failed to deliver. And in many respects, we could argue that this has happened again, in terms of a decision to burn more fossil fuels after 2030 was required. This didn't happen. There wasn't room for compromise, and we need massive and immediate change. I'm going to sound a bit like the activist here, but the question is, if we can't get the governments to do it, how do we do it? There is a model within, in terms of environmental systems, when you can get sudden shifts from one domain to another domain. There's a similar shift where systems go past the tipping point and flip into a new regime. And this happens in socioeconomics systems as well. And if you think of subprime mortgage crisis in the States triggering the global financial crisis, what's happened to EVs in Norway? They've become the social norm over there now because they went beyond that tipping point. And there's a paper called, or describing this, called Cascading Regime Shifts. So where does the tipping point lie? And it's been discovered that it's a critical threshold, which is when passed and you get 25% of the population subscribing to this committed minority, we can suddenly get social conventions flipping. So what I'm trying to say here is, don't give up hope, but we can't go quietly. We actually have to campaign and lobby in order to make a difference, which in many respects resonates with what Calum was saying. The other point I want to allude to is, though, beware of too narrow a focus, that we're not just looking at Scotland or the UK or Europe. Okay, we're looking at a global system, and what is locally clean has the potential to be globally filthy. This is from an article I read in The Guardian, which I actually touched on many of the things or thoughts I was having myself. So our clean green transport solution, this is a quote from it, is being built with the help of blood cobalt, blood lithium and blood copper. So are we, by achieving our own green credentials, damaging other areas and hampering their net zero objectives? And perhaps what we really should be thinking about is a genuinely green transport system, which involves a system change of a different kind. We need to reduce the need to travel. For instance, in Paris, there's a 15-minute city policy. We need to encourage walking and cycling by all who are able to do so, prioritise public transport, simply flipping from fossil fuel to electric cars, it preserves everything that's wrong with the way we travel, except the power source. So we need to use the properties of complex systems to trigger another shift, a political change in how we conceptualize wealth and growth. And by that, I'm really saying using GDP as a measure of wealth and economic performance is wrong. Green growth doesn't exist. Less of everything is the only way to avert catastrophe. And very quickly before the last slide, if I'm in the right place, wider context, tools for considering it, triple bottom line accountancy, that's profit, people and planet, whereby you factor in other layers into the model beyond just the economic one, and you include social and environmental layers. Consider donut economics, whereby you've got the concept of planetary boundaries with the complementary of social boundaries, and you've got that safe space within the middle, which is where we should be seeking to operate. And last, putting it within a global context, this takes me back to when I was a student way back in about 91, 92, the Gaia hypothesis by James Lovelock, and it proposes that living organisms interact with their inorganic surroundings on Earth to form a synergistic and self-regulating complex system that helps to maintain and perpetuate the conditions for life on the planet. If you mess with that, you've got problems. And that's a recent quote from James Lovelock: Gaia may destroy humans before we destroy the Earth. That's just a sobering thought to focus minds. So the summary one is, I've put up the Celtic Cruv Naveha tree of life up there to sort of symbolize that we need this harmony and balance. But coming back to these themes at the start that run through this week: environment, transport, energy, growing and crofting, adaptation and next steps. And I'm hoping that I've touched and given you some ideas on one or two of those themes. And just to summarize, is Greta's position blah, blah, blah right? At the moment, I think yes. I've mentioned about there being previous COP26. Are we guilty of a narrowness of focus? That's not for me to say. Is a shift in stable social norms required? Yes. Can we do it? Probably. Should we be lobbying for a whole system approach involving major infrastructural investment and legislative change to allow a decentralized approach to address the issues? And this is whether, can we do it at a community level, or should really this be taken forward at a national or regional level? Can we as a community make a difference? The power, and this is taking you back to the quote from the previous article, the power of small groups comes from their commitment to a cause. So what have we done locally? Yes, we've delivered projects, but to an extent this has been piecemeal. What is now needed is a joined up strategic regional approach for change to be delivered on the scale required. We know what needs to happen locally in respect of agriculture, crofting, land use, business, energy, transport, shipping, aviation, etc., etc. We have a track record in capacity and sustainable development and community wealth building. And I don't mean this as in Barra and Vatersay, I mean this for every community organisation throughout the Western Isles. We have the opportunity through initiatives such as Repeat and ICNZ, as well as through carbon offset and blue and green bonds. We're aware of the challenges such as fuel poverty and the need for a just transition, as well as the rob Peter to pay Paul issues if a whole system or a holistic approach is not adopted. So what I'd ask you to do is, those that haven't signed up for the adaptation and next steps on Friday, sign up. It's an opportunity to express your views and opinions, and perhaps even to pass them on to our elected MP and MSP. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. That was really great, amazing to cover so many different topics, and I think you spoke very knowledgeably and well about all of them, and definitely appreciate that plug at the end of the session about there's two sessions we've got on Friday. One in the morning, hosted by this Outer Hebrides Climate Change Working Group, which is part of the Community Planning Partnership, and talking about some of the ways communities can get involved in that. And then in the afternoon, as Ewan was saying, the opportunity to talk to our elected politicians, elected officials, and